They said I was just a housewife, a burden, a woman who knew nothing about business, who only drained the family's resources with her cooking and cleaning. They told me to stay out of the way, let the men handle the important matters, they'd say with condescending smiles. But the day I overheard my husband's voice shaking on a phone call, the word bankruptcy slipping out like a curse, I knew the truth they were sinking, and they didn't even see it coming. While they laughed over wine and wasted money on luxury, I stayed up late crunching numbers, reading contracts, and finding the holes they refused to see. They thought I was a burden, but I was the only one holding this family together. And when the time came, I didn't just save them, I made sure they'd never forget who the real backbone of this family was. My name is Laura Mitchell, 42 years old. For years, I've been the silent, often dismissed figure in the Mitchell household. While my husband Richard, 45, thrived as the busy, stressed, and often irritable sales director of his family's company Mitchell & Sons, I was the stay-at-home mom. In their eyes, particularly those of my mother-in-law, Margaret, 65, and imperious, I was just a housewife, someone who didn't contribute financially. Margaret never missed an opportunity to emphasize that I was merely a shadow in the family, playing no significant role. Our eldest son, David, 22, and fresh out of college, mirrored this sentiment with his own brand of youthful arrogance, often showing off and dismissing any opinion I might have. Even our 16-year-old daughter Emily, though closer to me, was inevitably influenced by the family's prevailing view. What none of them knew was that behind the facade of domesticity, I was the meticulous financial manager of our household, quietly ensuring bills were paid, investments were tracked, and our personal finances were sound. And more recently, my skills had been secretly applied to a much larger, more desperate situation. The Mitchell family, owners of the prestigious Mitchell & Sons Furniture Company, lived a life of upper-middle-class comfort, oblivious to the fact that their legacy was teetering on the brink of collapse, a truth only I had uncovered. They thought I was a burden. Every time I walked into the room, I felt it, the sighs, the glances, the subtle shift in the air, as if my presence weighed them down. Like I was an extra mouth to feed a drain on the family's resources. Margaret, my mother-in-law, never said it outright, but her words dripped with condescension. "Oh, Laura, we all know running a household is important, but let's leave the big decisions to Richard, shall we?" Her voice would rise in pitch, the word important, wrapped in just enough sarcasm to sting. Richard. He didn't even notice anymore. He'd shrug off my suggestions at the dinner table, eyes glued to his phone, nodding absently as if I was background noise. And David, our eldest, barely hid his disdain. He was 22, fresh out of business school, full of confidence and arrogance that only a privileged upbringing can breed. "Mom, seriously," he'd say with an eye roll when I tried to ask about the company's finances. "You wouldn't understand." Even Emily, sweet? Emily had started to parrot their dismissive tone. "Mom, you worry too much. Dad's got this." I'd smile. I'd nod. I'd clear the plates and fold the laundry and make the beds. I'd listen to their endless conversations about quarterly earnings, marketing strategies, and expansion plans while I washed dishes in the kitchen unseen and unheard. But what they didn't know, what they never cared to see, was that I knew everything. I knew the password to Richard's business email. I knew the exact amount left on our mortgage. I knew the unpaid invoices piling up in a folder marked urgent in the bottom drawer of Richard's desk. I knew the bank had been calling. The voicemails left unreturned, the warning letters he shoved into the back of the filing cabinet. I knew we were drowning, and I knew they had no idea. It started small, a late payment here, an overdraft there. Richard would come home late, tension etched into his forehead, his tie askew, smelling faintly of whiskey and desperation. But every time I tried to ask, he'd brush me off. "Don't worry about it, Laura." Or worse, "You wouldn't understand." So I stopped asking, and I started watching. I stayed up late after everyone had gone to bed, the glow of my laptop illuminating the dark kitchen. I opened the bank statements, the invoices, the loan agreements. I read articles about bankruptcy law, debt restructuring, small business management. I watched videos, took notes, made spreadsheets. I had always been good with numbers, a skill I'd honed managing our household budget, meticulously stretching Richard's often erratic contributions further than he could imagine. Now I was applying that skill on a much grander, more terrifying scale. I learned. And I saw the truth. Mitchell & Sons wasn't just in trouble. It was bleeding. Badly. Years of Margaret's extravagant demands on company funds for personal expenses. Richard's overly ambitious but poorly researched expansion projects. David's brilliant but costly marketing flops and a general culture of wasteful spending had led them here. Failed contracts and out-of-control overheads were the final nails in the coffin. Richard had been too proud to admit the depth of the crisis, too blind, or perhaps too afraid to see it. And Margaret. She was too busy hosting charity luncheons and planning her next European cruise to care about something as mundane as a balance sheet. They thought they were untouchable. They thought I was the burden, but I was the only one who saw the storm coming. And I knew if I didn't act fast, we'd all go down with the ship. The final straw, the moment that galvanized me into action, came on a rainy Tuesday morning. I was clearing the dining room table after breakfast, the clatter of plates a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had permeated the meal. I heard Richard's voice in his study, low and tense. I paused in the hallway, my heart suddenly racing, straining to hear. I can't cover payroll next month, Mark. I'm completely tapped out. If we don't get that new loan approved by Friday, the bank's going to seize the main warehouse. We're finished. There was a pause, then his voice tight with a panic I'd never heard from him before. Just get the damned paperwork ready. I'll sign whatever it takes. The house. Yes, the house. If we have to use it as collateral, then so be it. There's no other way. I froze. The house, our home. The place where I'd raised my children, the only stable thing in our lives. The walls of the hallway felt like they were closing in on me. My breath hitched. I pressed a hand against the cool door frame, steadying myself against a wave of nausea and cold dread. Richard was willing to risk everything: our home, our future, our children's stability on a desperate gamble without even telling me the woman who had made this house a home. And Margaret, she'd probably encourage it. Anything to protect the family name, even if it meant homelessness for her son's family. But not me. I wouldn't stand by and watch them destroy everything. I couldn't let it happen. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat at the kitchen table staring out at the relentless rain streaking down the window pane, the city lights blurred and distant. And I made a decision. If they thought I was just a burden, a nobody, then I'd show them exactly who had been silently holding this family and their precious company together all along. The next morning, I woke up before anyone else. The house was still the faint hum of the refrigerator, the only sound in the quiet. I sat at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee gone cold, staring at the file I had started the night before. My silent war had begun. I opened my laptop and began systematically gathering everything: bank statements from the last 3 years, overdue invoices from suppliers, credit card bills showing extravagant and unnecessary company expenses, loan agreements with crippling interest rates. I created a master spreadsheet, meticulously color-coding the red: payments, missed debts, due assets, at-risk cash flow deficits. The picture that emerged was grim, far grimmer than even I had initially suspected. Mitchell & Sons wasn't just teetering on the edge of collapse. It was in a financial freefall. If Richard went through with that new desperate loan using our house as collateral, it wouldn't just be the business that fell. We would lose everything. But I had a plan, a fragile seedling of an idea that had been taking root in my mind during those long, lonely nights of research. I reached out to an old business contact, someone Richard and his family had long since forgotten, or more accurately, dismissed. James Carter. 10 years ago, before Richard's arrogance had fully inflated, when Mitchell & Sons was smaller but more stable, James had been a struggling local supplier who provided quality materials for their projects. He'd been treated poorly, often paid late, his invoices disputed, and eventually callously dismissed when larger, seemingly cheaper national suppliers came knocking. But I remembered his quiet integrity, the kindness he had shown me at a charity fundraiser, once a rare moment of genuine human connection in the often stifling atmosphere of the Mitchell social circle. He'd told me then, his eyes thoughtful: Laura, people often underestimate quiet women like you. But quiet doesn't mean powerless. It often means you're observing, learning. I found his number buried deep in an old, almost forgotten contact list on my phone. My hands trembled as I dialed, my heart pounding. "Laura Mitchell," I said when he finally answered, my voice shaking slightly, but I hoped steady enough to convey purpose. "It's been a long time. I need your help." There was a pause, a moment of silence where I imagined him trying to place my name. "Laura," he said slowly, surprise evident in his voice. "Laura Mitchell. Well, this is unexpected. I never thought I'd hear from you again after. I need a favor, James, a significant one. Not for me, for my family, for the company. They're in serious trouble, and they don't even realize how deep the rot goes." I explained everything: the mounting debts, Richard's desperate plan to mortgage our home, the imminent collapse of the company, the years of mismanagement and waste I had uncovered. James listened in complete silence without interruption. When I finally finished, my voice raw, he spoke, his tone thoughtful, not unkind. "I always knew you were the smart one in that family, Laura, the one with her feet on the ground." My throat tightened at his unexpected validation. It was more respect than I'd received from my own husband in years. "I'm not asking for charity, James," I said quickly, my pride kicking in. "I wouldn't. But I have a plan, a detailed plan, if you're willing to listen, to consider it." He was. That afternoon, while the rest of the Mitchell clan was out at yet another pointless, expensive charity luncheon, Margaret preening in her pearls and latest designer suit, Richard dutifully schmoozing potential clients who likely wouldn't materialize, I sat down at the dining room table not to set it for dinner, but to draft a comprehensive business proposal. A full restructuring plan for Mitchell & Sons. 1. Immediate and drastic cuts to all non-essential spending by at least 30%, starting with Margaret's company-funded personal stylist and David's vanity marketing projects. 2. Liquidation of underperforming and non-essential assets, beginning with the vacant commercial lot Richard had impulsively bought 2 years ago for future expansion that never happened. 3. Aggressive renegotiation of terms with key suppliers, offering them a stake in future recovery. 4. Most importantly, bringing in a strategic silent partner, James Carter, who would inject vital capital in exchange for a significant equity stake and a say in future financial controls. It wasn't a perfect plan. It was drastic. It would mean sacrifices. But it was a lifeline. It was survival. When Richard came home that night later than usual, tired and visibly irritable, the scent of stale coffee and stress clinging to him, I tried to speak with him before he could retreat into his study. "Richard, we need to talk. Urgently. About the loan for the company." He cut me off with an impatient wave of his hand, not even looking at me. "Not now, Laura. I've had a monumentally long day. I can't deal with this." "Richard, please. It can't wait. I know you're worried. I know about the plan to use the house as collateral." His head snapped up, then his eyes narrowing with suspicion. "What are you talking about? How could you possibly know that I heard you on the phone this morning? With Mark?" He stared at me, stunned for a moment, and then his face twisted into a familiar sneer. "You've been eavesdropping on my private business calls now, have you?" "Laura, I've been listening, Richard. Listening to the sound of our lives falling apart. Something you apparently stopped doing a long, long time ago." His voice rose sharp with anger and defensiveness. "You wouldn't understand the complexities. This is business, Laura. High-level finance way out of your depth. Leave it to the professionals, to the men who actually understand these things." I took a step closer, my own voice low but firm, refusing to be intimidated. "Richard, if you sign that loan on Friday, we lose our home. I am not going to let that happen." Margaret's voice, sharp and disapproving as always, cut in from the doorway where she'd obviously been listening. "Oh, please, Laura, don't embarrass yourself further. What could you possibly know about business? You can't even manage to organize a proper dinner party without some catastrophe." Her words, calculated to wound, sliced through the room, drawing a wince from Emily, who had just walked in, and a smirk from David, who sat scrolling on his phone at the kitchen island, barely looking up from his screen. I took a deep, steadying breath, refusing to let her see how much her casual cruelty still stung. "Maybe you're right, Margaret. Maybe I'm not a proper businesswoman in your eyes. But I know how to read numbers. I know how to balance a budget. And I know with absolute certainty when a family and a company is standing on the very edge of a cliff. The silence that followed was deafening, charged with unspoken resentment and dawning unease. That night, after everyone else had retreated to their respective rooms, I sat alone in the dark living room, the half-packed boxes from my research stacked neatly in the corner. My hands were shaking, but my mind was crystal clear. They thought I was weak, insignificant, a burden. They were profoundly wrong. I was the only one who could save this family from themselves. And tomorrow, at that fateful bank meeting Richard had scheduled, I would prove it. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The quiet, early light filtered through the curtains, casting long shadows across the room. I sat at the kitchen table, a steaming cup of coffee in front of me, and opened my laptop. The spreadsheet I'd been building over the last week glowed back at me, the red lines of debt, the unpaid invoices, the loans, all of it laid out in brutal, undeniable clarity. The evidence of their carelessness, their arrogance, their blind faith in a crumbling empire. This wasn't just a business problem, it was a family problem, and I was going to fix it. I called James Carter that morning. He answered on the second ring, his voice calm and steady. "Laura, I have everything I said," my voice shaking slightly with a mixture of nerves and adrenaline. "I know exactly where the company is bleeding, every misstep, every wasted dollar. And I have a comprehensive plan, but I need your help to make them listen. Your backing." "Send it over," he said without hesitation. "Let me see what you've got." I emailed him the files, every spreadsheet detailing their financial hemorrhage, every scanned invoice proving wasteful expenditure, every breakdown of where the money was going, and more importantly, where it wasn't. My detailed restructuring proposal was the centerpiece. Hours later, what felt like an eternity, he called back. "Laura, this is solid work. Impressive, actually. Extremely thorough. Where did you learn to do all this?" I let out a soft, bitter laugh. By watching, by listening, by being the invisible one who actually paid attention, by caring more about this family's future than they ever seemed to. He was quiet for a moment, a respectful silence. "I can work with this," he said finally. "It's a sound plan, albeit aggressive. I'm willing to invest, to be that strategic partner you outlined, but I have conditions, Laura." I sat up straighter, my heart pounding. "Name them. You become part of the leadership team. Officially, a seat on the board. You have real power, Laura, a deciding vote. No more being shut out, no more being a silent observer. You get a voice, a real voice in how this company runs from now on." For a moment, I couldn't breathe. It was more than I'd dared to hope for. "Deal," I said quietly, my hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly my knuckles were white. I hung up my heart, racing, a strange mixture of terror and elation coursing through me. That night at dinner, the tension in the air was thicker than ever. Margaret found fault with every dish. Richard scrolled endlessly through his phone, his face grim, and David bragged about his latest groundbreaking business ideas that sounded more like half-baked expensive schemes destined for failure. I waited until the plates were cleared, until the coffee was poured. Then I stood. "I have something to say," I announced, my voice cutting through their self-absorbed conversation like a knife. Richard looked up, frowning, clearly annoyed at the interruption. "Laura, not now. Now." "Richard," I said firmly, my gaze unwavering. The room fell silent. Even David looked up from his phone, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. I placed a thick, meticulously organized folder on the dining table, my plan, the stark evidence of their financial ruin, the proposal that held their only hope. "I know the company is days, perhaps even hours away from bankruptcy. I know you've been hiding the true extent of it, Richard. I know you planned to sign a loan tomorrow using this house as collateral without telling any of us the full risk." Richard's face turned a blotchy red, his mouth opening in shock and then anger. Margaret's hand flew to her chest in a theatrical gesture of affront. "Laura, how dare you make such outrageous accusations?" I held up a hand, a small, firm gesture that stopped her cold. "No, Margaret. How dare you all treat me like I'm invisible, like my opinion doesn't matter while this family and its legacy fall apart around you, due to your negligence and arrogance." I opened the folder, spreading out the documents one by one, the cold, hard facts. "Here are the numbers. The real numbers. The crushing debts. The stacks of unpaid invoices you've been ignoring. The warehouse you were about to lose. The long-term suppliers who are on the verge of walking away because of broken promises. I took a deep breath, steadying my voice, channeling all the pain and frustration of years into a calm, clear presentation. And here I said, placing my restructuring plan on top is the solution. I outlined the plan, the painful but necessary cost-cutting, the strategic asset liquidation, the renegotiation of supplier contracts, and finally, James Carter's offer to invest contingent on new leadership and fiscal responsibility. Their faces shifted through a kaleidoscope of emotions, from indignation and disbelief to dawning shock, and then finally to something I hadn't seen on their faces in a very long time when they looked at me. Fear, and a sliver of grudging respect. Richard stared at the papers, his hands trembling slightly as he reached for them. Laura, when did you? By paying attention, Richard. I said, my voice quiet but fierce. By doing the work you all thought was beneath you or beyond me. David looked pale, as if the floor had just dropped out from under him. His usual bravado was gone. Emily's eyes were wide, darting between me, her father, and the damning documents. Margaret's mouth opened, then closed, her face flushing a deep, unbecoming red. For once, she was speechless. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze locked on Richard's, pinning him in place. If you want to save this company, if you want to save this family from ruin, you'll listen to me. You'll implement this plan. You'll let me lead this recovery, and you will all stop pretending I don't exist, that I don't matter. The silence that followed was heavy, profound, but I didn't flinch. I didn't look away. I had the proof. I had the plan, and for the first time I had the power. They could no longer deny me. They could no longer dismiss me. The boardroom was a cold, gleaming space, all smoked glass, polished dark wood, and oversized black leather chairs that seemed to dwarf the people sitting in them. It was the next morning, the morning Richard was supposed to sign the catastrophic loan. Richard sat at the head of the long table, looking strained and older than his years. David was on one side, unusually subdued Margaret on the other, her face a mask of rigid disapproval. Across from them I sat quietly, my meticulously prepared folder in front of me, my hands folded calmly in my lap, my spine straight. James Carter was there too at my invitation. His presence was calm, composed, but it radiated an unmistakable aura of quiet power and authority that immediately shifted the room's dynamics. The room buzzed with muted, nervous conversation, furtive glances exchanged between the other board members, mostly aging family friends who had long deferred to Richard and Margaret. The tension was so thick it felt like it could snap. Richard cleared his throat, his voice tight, strained. Well, let's get this presentation over with. I met his gaze, my eyes steady, unwavering. I'm here because you're about to sign away our home, our family's future, without a viable plan, without a safety net. And I'm not going to stand by and let you do it. Richard's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing in his cheek. I'm doing what needs to be done to save this company, Laura. You wouldn't understand the kind of pressure I'm under. Margaret chimed in, her voice dripping with its familiar condescension, though it lacked some of its usual bite. Laura, dear, we all appreciate your newfound concern, but this really isn't the time or place for housewife fantasies about running a business. Before I could respond, James Carter shifted in his chair, his eyes narrowing slightly as he fixed Margaret with a cool stare. With all due respect, Margaret, perhaps you should let her finish. Laura has done her homework, more than anyone else in this room from what I've seen. Margaret's head snapped toward him, her mouth opening in protest, but he simply raised a hand, a small authoritative gesture that stopped her cold. The other board members looked on intrigued. I opened my folder, laying out the documents one by one, just as I had done at the dinner table, but this time for a wider audience. The irrefutable evidence of their financial mismanagement, the spiraling debts, the unpaid invoices, the overdue notices from increasingly impatient creditors. Here's the reality of Mitchell & Sons, I said calmly, my voice carrying clearly in the suddenly silent room. As of this morning, the company is weeks, if not days away from involuntary bankruptcy. If Richard signs that loan agreement today, the bank will indeed provide a temporary reprieve, but at the cost of our family home. And given the company's current burn rate and lack of a viable recovery strategy, that reprieve will be short-lived. Within 6 months, you'll default and they will take the house. We will lose everything. David scoffed, attempting to regain some of his lost bravado, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. Mom, with all due respect, you're not a financial expert. You're a homemaker. Let the people who actually know what they're doing handle this. I turned to him, my voice sharp but measured each word precise. David, your last expert marketing campaign, the one you launched without a proper budget or market research, cost this company over $200,000 with zero return on investment. Your inability to balance a simple departmental checkbook is legendary among the accounting staff. So perhaps for once in your life, you should sit down, be quiet, and listen to someone who has actually done the work. The room fell dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. David's mouth opened, then closed. His face flushed a painful mottled red. He shrank back in his chair, utterly deflated. Richard leaned forward, his eyes dark, a storm brewing within them. But it wasn't just anger I saw. It was a dawning, horrified realization. And what exactly do you propose we do, Laura? Since you seem to have all the answers. I took a breath, steady and deep, feeling a calm I hadn't anticipated. I've already done it, Richard. I found the solution. I slid the final crucial document across the polished table towards him, a signed letter of intent from James Carter. James spoke up, then his voice clear, strong, resonating with authority. I'm prepared to invest $500,000 into Mitchell & Sons effective immediately. This capital injection will stabilize the company and allow for the implementation of Laura's comprehensive restructuring plan. My investment comes with one non-negotiable condition. Laura Mitchell joins the board of directors and is appointed chief financial officer with equal voting rights and oversight of all financial decisions. The room erupted, not in applause but in shocked, disbelieving murmurs. Margaret's voice rose in a shrill, indignant pitch. This is outrageous, preposterous. She's not qualified. She has no experience. Richard's face twisted in disbelief, staring at me as if seeing me for the first time. Laura, what the hell is this? CFO, you! I met his gaze, my voice low and steady, unshakable. This is me saving your company, Richard, saving this family from the ruin you were all blindly stumbling towards. And if you don't accept this deal, if you choose your pride over survival, then you will indeed lose everything. The choice is yours. For a long, breathless moment, no one spoke. The future of Mitchell & Sons, the fate of our family hung suspended in that charged silence. Then, Emily, my sweet quiet, Emily, who had insisted on attending the meeting, spoke up. Her voice soft but surprisingly firm, cutting through the noise like a clear bell. Dad, Grandma, I think Mom's right. I think you need to listen to her. Her words, so simple, so honest, seemed to break the spell. Richard looked at her, then at me, then down at the papers spread before him. His shoulders, usually so squared with arrogance, slumped with the undeniable weight of years of mismanagement and denial crashing down upon him. He let out a long, shuddering breath, rubbing his temples as if trying to ward off a splitting headache. Fine, he muttered the word, barely audible. Fine, we accept the deal. Margaret's face twisted in outrage, her mouth opening to protest again, but one sharp look from James Carter and then a weary, defeated glance from her own son silenced her. I sat back in my chair, my hands still folded, my heart pounding a steady, triumphant rhythm in my chest. For the first time in all my married years, they were truly listening. They were seeing me. And I wasn't just a shadow in the corner anymore. I wasn't just the ignored housewife. I was the voice that mattered, the mind that had saved them. The days that followed were a blur, a whirlwind of intense meetings, complex contract negotiations, and the signing of countless legal documents. Richard, to his credit, swallowed his pride, however grudgingly, and agreed to the terms of James Carter's deal. He signed the papers that officially made me CFO and a voting member of the board. Margaret, though visibly furious and deeply resentful, knew she had no choice but to retreat into a simmering, impotent silence. Her reign of unchecked spending and imperious pronouncements was over. David, for once, seemed to genuinely grasp the magnitude of his past failures and the precariousness of their situation, retreating into an uneasy, watchful quiet. But Emily, my sweet Emily, she became my quiet supporter, my anchor in the storm of change. "Mom," she whispered late one night as we sat together in the dim light of the kitchen, sharing a rare, peaceful cup of tea. "I'm so sorry. I'm sorry I never understood what you were really doing for us all these years." Tears stung my eyes, but I smiled, reaching across the table to take her hand. "You don't have to apologize, baby. You just have to remember this. Remember that value isn't always loud or flashy." She nodded, her grip tightening on mine, a new understanding dawning in her young eyes. James Carter officially became a silent partner in Mitchell & Sons. His investment, along with the immediate implementation of my restructuring plan, began to staunch the financial bleeding. We sold the underperforming vacant lot at a small profit. We renegotiated supplier contracts from a position of newfound, albeit fragile, strength. We trimmed the excessive, unnecessary spending that Margaret had always justified as maintaining appearances, and Richard had been too weak or too distracted to curb. And me, I took my seat at the boardroom table literally and figuratively. The first time I walked into that room as chief financial officer, an equal among them, I felt their eyes on me. Richard's gaze was guarded, a mixture of resentment and grudging respect. David's was humbled, perhaps even a little fearful. Margaret's was tight-lipped and bitter, but they listened. When I spoke, they listened. I presented financial projections with confidence. I detailed cost-cutting strategies with irrefutable logic. I outlined potential growth opportunities based on sound market research, not on whims or ego. And for the first time in our shared history, they nodded. They asked intelligent questions. They took notes. They, albeit slowly, began to follow my lead. This wasn't just about saving a company from bankruptcy. It was about fundamentally rewriting the narrative they had constructed about me, about our family for years. The narrative that I was just the housewife, the financial burden, the one who didn't belong in their world of business and important matters. No, I was the glue that had held this family together through countless storms they never even knew were raging. I was the quiet planner, the unseen strategist, the silent storm they never saw coming until it broke over their heads. I was the pillar they had never respected, never even truly seen, until I became the very foundation they couldn't survive without. One evening, weeks later, after a particularly long but productive board meeting where my proposed budget for the next fiscal year was approved unanimously, Richard lingered behind as the others filed out of the room. He cleared his throat, his posture awkward, his usual bluster entirely absent. "Laura," he began, then hesitated. I was wrong," he said quietly, his gaze fixed somewhere on the polished tabletop. "About everything. About you." I looked at him, my face calm, my heart surprisingly steady. The old anger the years of hurt had begun to recede, replaced by a quiet sense of vindication. "I know, Richard." He nodded, swallowing hard, a flicker of genuine guilt, of deep regret in his eyes. "I should have listened to you years ago. I should have valued you. I should have treated you better, as my partner, in everything." I let the silence hang in the air for a moment, heavy but necessary. It wasn't my place to absolve him easily. "Richard," I said finally, my voice, "even you have a great deal to make up for. To me, to the children, to this company." His shoulders, which had seemed to carry the weight of the world just weeks before, sagged a little further, but he nodded again, meeting my eyes this time. "I know, and I will, if you'll let me." And for the first time in a very long time, I believed he might actually mean it. Life didn't magically become perfect overnight. There were still struggles, still arguments, still moments when old habits, old resentments tried to creep back in. But I held my ground. I had found my voice, and I was no longer afraid to use it. I made sure they never forgot the lessons learned. At the next large family dinner, a much more subdued affair than in years past, as we sat around the table, I caught Margaret watching me. Her gaze wasn't as sharp as critical as before. It was more wary, more uncertain, perhaps even containing a sliver of grudgingly earned respect. She lifted her wine glass slightly, a small, almost imperceptible nod in my direction, a silent acknowledgement. I met her eyes and held them for a moment. No words were needed. The power dynamic had irrevocably shifted. Lucas. My perceptive, wonderful son sitting next to me leaned over and whispered, a grin playing on his lips. Mom, I think you're kind of a boss now. I laughed softly, ruffling his hair, my heart full. You have no idea, sweetheart. And as I looked around that table at the family I had in my own quiet way, saved at the legacy I had against all odds protected, I knew one thing for certain: they would never, ever underestimate me or any quiet woman again, because I wasn't just a wife. I wasn't just a mother. I certainly wasn't a burden. I was the woman who had saved them when they couldn't or wouldn't save themselves. I was the pillar they had never seen until it was the only thing holding up the roof, and they would never forget it. Don't ever underestimate the woman in the family. They are the silent heartbeat, and sometimes they are the ones who keep everything from collapsing. I wasn't weak. I was a mother, and that made me invincible.